Steve Carlson here. Well, tomorrow's Labor Day, celebrating the memory of when we had jobs and the economy was succeeding. And then the great Minnesota get-together is over. Then the election starts, according to tradition. But already Al Franken has been ducking debates, and the silence this year has been deafening. And if Minnesota's Democratic Party has its way, the silence will get a lot more deafening. This year we heard, or more precisely didn't hear, political speech and debate on NPR, Minnesota Public Radio, who claims to represent the Minnesota public and its interests, but it's really a Democratic operative. And this year at the fair, NPR presents, not Al Franken, but a Franken stand-in, Amy Klobuchar. I hear Al's latest ad is an attack ad. It attacks Mike McFadden, the Republican, for not being funny. Imagine that. A guy just runs for office as a straight man and is not funny. I guess Amy was funnier. I know Jim Klobuchar's fame as a humorist, but Al, the election for U.S. Senator from the little faraway state of Minnesota out here on the prairie is a lot different than a runoff between David Letterman and Jay Leno. I know that's a big deal in New York City, but in Minnesota, elections have always been about caring. Yes, we care. It's not a show. And right now, Minnesota is frustrated and fed up with goofing around on a stage. And we're ready to get down to work. And that's what Labor Day is all about. We're getting to work on the 2014 election on November 4th. And I say the silence is going to get a lot more deafening, because together with NPR's Mike Mulcahy, Amy and Al attacked another great American tradition and cornerstone, the First Amendment.
But the other piece of this is to pass a constitutional amendment that basically overturns that Citizens United case.
No way.
How else
you
can limit
That's my question.
this negative money and negative ads coming in when even from one person can buy
I know you want me
either
upstairs. I'll sit here.
Either side can do this. Either side can do this. And that's just wrong when you have a democracy where everyone is supposed to participate in the same way. So I think that's the major problem. I have always, as someone who's not personally wealthy, like some of these people that can literally fund their own campaigns,
so repeal the First Amendment.
They do have to raise money. It's the reality.
Free and fair elections. Hard to believe it, but Al and Amy are trying to give control over campaign speech to Congress for federal elections under the First Amendment, and control over campaign speech in Minnesota elections to the Minnesota legislature. Under DFL dominance, they did a job on marriage and religion, and now Al and Amy want to give them control over speech during elections. So I guess that little office over there in Mark Ritchie's Secretary of State Department will be collecting tickets for speaking during the election, or maybe giving out tickets and fines for speaking up during an election. All courtesy of Al Franken and Amy Klobuchar and their new souped-up First Amendment. Amy, who's not up for re-election until 2018, touched on a few other issues in her survey of the political scene in place of any state fair debates. Issues like how important it is to her that she's a woman.
This should be a major driving force, because every time you elevate the status of women and girls, you elevate democracy.
But her big news was that she wanted to limit the amount of money spent getting campaign messages out. She calls it negative money. And she wants it out because someone might win. There might be millionaires behind the message, and she's not a millionaire, and so she could lose. Other than that, the big news has been the GOP booth muzzling their Supreme Court candidate, the one who's running against Al Franken's elections lawyer, who produced that nail-biter 2008 victory of Al Franken over the people of Minnesota, David Lillehaug, who Mark Dayton quickly appointed. So Al's done pretty well in his mind, and I have brought on board a new friend of the people of Minnesota to symbolize independent voters, the American bald eagle, who made numerous appearances throughout the state fair season. But in all this silence of the politicians, one voice has stood out and stands tall above the fray. Yours. Yes, yours. Survey USA released a survey for KSTP during the state fair, and while the survey doesn't get it all right, they asked about you, the voters, the likely voters, And this brought out some key messages, and I want to headline some of these, focusing now on the issues you think are most likely to decide your vote on November 4th. Throughout the campaign and the debates, I will be addressing these, including right here on this channel. I'll point out that for issues regarding the federal government, like the U.S. Senate, many issues were not offered as choices. Foreign policy, national security, national debt, national defense, privacy from the national intelligence agencies, immigration, the list can go on. This is a state-based survey with state-based issues. But as to how the government is affecting the lives of everyday Minnesotans, this survey and your responses to it are extremely valuable. First, I want to start with jobs. Now, I'll tell you right away that more voters named healthcare and taxes as their big issues. But I start with jobs because Minnesotans are unanimous across all age groups on this one. It is striking that for likely voters 65 years and older, for 20% of those voters, the top issue is jobs. I mean, go figure. In Minnesota today, in Obama's and Franken's economy, for retired people, people we might expect to be retiring, the most important issue is jobs. That is ahead of the 19% for the age group 50 to 64. That's where I fall. And ahead of the 19% for the age group 35 to 49. That's where Mike McFadden falls into. For those 18 to 34 years old, 22% of you say jobs is the number one issue. But this is not just a millennial issue, though millennials face many major problems, including this one. The average is 20% across age groups and gender who name jobs as your most important issue in deciding who you'll vote for in this U.S. Senate race. The top focus on jobs among women edged out the men's interest just 20% to 19%. The similar intense focus on jobs as the key issue shows we are all affected, and we've got to pull together to see our nation through. And some of our best productivity and new ideas will come from those 65 and over. I don't think all those seniors are necessarily looking for work for themselves, though. They also understand how key employment opportunities have always been. They want opportunity for their children and grandchildren and for their state of Minnesota. And the Democrat-led recovery has not been successful, though they're trying to jiggle the numbers around to make the issue go away. But it's still right up there, despite Democrat attempts to make it go away. In 2012 and 2010, jobs was the major issue, because yes, it's been that long since the Great Recession started, and Democrat leadership has not got the job done. That's why I'm running. Although jobs is no longer issue number one, it isn't because the recovery from the Great Recession is over. It's still plodding aimlessly. But two other issues are clearly out of control and dominate Minnesota voters' attention more strongly than the jobs issue itself, according to the KSTP poll. Taxes with 26%, and health care still the top issue with 28%. Now on health care, with 28% saying this is the top issue that will determine their vote, only 27% of likely Minnesota voters in the U.S. Senate race approve of the performance of Minnesota's health insurance exchange. 48% disapprove. And so to those who say, there, you see, it's not so bad, Obamacare is not so bad, I say this. Already 48% say this is the wrong road to go down. I say, rip it apart. That is a good description of my position. Let it fall apart. Stop the mandates. Those are unfair taxes on the young healthies who do not need more taxes. Let Obamacare die, but work together to save lives. Target killer diseases. Reduce health disparities between races, between the rich and the poor to save lives. By proactive early detection and prevention programs like BSEP, the National Breast and Cervical Cancer Early Detection and Treatment Program. There are people with more aggressive forms of cancer who are not getting the standard treatment for that peril, and so are dying and suffering disproportionately compared to the whole population. That's a health disparity. Targeting killer diseases and health disparities will help the millennials. Obamacare will not. As I read this survey, with just 17% of millennials saying healthcare is the top issue, well, this is likely voters, and a lot of millennials who are getting hit with this Obamacare tax are not likely to vote. I know the myth is that the Democrats are going to cover those who can't afford it, but for anyone who's ever tried to get the government to agree they can't afford it, for instance, going into court without paying the high cost of court filing fees, a lot of people who believe they can't afford it, well, the government believes they can. And you have to realize these health costs are going to continue to skyrocket, and premiums and deductibles are going to continue to skyrocket. And a lot of millennials who will be hit by this are not expected by the KSTP poll to vote, they say. Only 14% of the November 4th voters will be 18 to 34. Among those 65 and over, 37% say this will be the issue that they decide their vote on. This reflects the importance of health care to those over 65, many of whom are receiving Medicare benefits and paying for supplemental programs. And Barack Obama insisted that he would cut Medicare to fund 1/3 of Obamacare costs. I have him saying that on my website, stevecarlsonforcongress2010.com. So Democrats have cut Medicare and will cut Medicare. So we have to stop the costs of Obamacare. We should stop the mandate and take measures immediately to restore the economy and create jobs. All these three top issues are related: jobs, health care, and taxes. And we need to elect a U.S. Senator who is going to bring back jobs. My plan to restore the power of enforcing usury laws for consumer debt will create millions of jobs in the U.S. and tens of thousands right here in Minnesota, and will take unfair burdens of debt off of Minnesota households. My plan for reversing the out-of-control federal debt by transitioning the power and resources back to the states will control spending, show a clear correction toward restoring fiscal viability that will encourage business growth, and these changes will allow Americans to pursue their own health plans and encourage continuing investment in healthcare advances and knowledge and distribute those to everybody. Stop Obamacare, build up the state's role in helping with healthcare, but allow the free market and, yes, insurance companies to be there so people will be allowed and encouraged to use their own means to get better health. Obamacare is a fraud because it pretends to be a government insurance program, but the big difference is that it forces young people who don't have jobs, families, or homes to pay for health care costs of the older generation and those with greater health care needs. It hides this by forcing the parents to pay for their insurance, driving their costs up until the children are 26. But all the costs keep going up, and forcing the younger people to pay for the older is not insurance. And the injustice and ineffectiveness of this is shown by the fact that as a young pay-in, they're probably paying for a program that will not be there for them when they need it. And the program is designed by Barack Obama to weaken and gut Medicare, cutting Medicare to fund 1/3 of the cost of Obamacare. I will offer other videos to address each of these issues and compare my positions of leadership with that of Al Franken, the incumbent senator, and the 60th vote to get Obamacare across the finish line, a bill that you had to pass before you could read it to find out what was in it. And I will compare and contrast with Mike McFadden, the GOP challenger. This is an important decision for Minnesota. Al Franken and Amy Klobuchar have made bad decisions for Minnesota, and things have just gotten worse in Washington. Gender does not matter. It does not matter whether you're funny or not. But your vote on November 4th, 2014 will matter. And I want to ask you to vote for me, Steve Carlson, on November 4th. And I will continue to work to understand and address these issues and to restore jobs in the economy and economic opportunity without high federal taxes and out-of-control federal spending, and give you back your health care freedom, as well as advance our education and preparedness, protect us from terrorism and chaos in the world, restore right relations with other nations, advance civil rights and equal opportunity in all the critical areas in which the Senate needs to work. I'll protect our democracy and free and fair elections. You can bet that by putting me in the Senate, you will send to Washington a champion for honest, free, and open elections, free from court meddling to restrict the freedom of voters and candidates, and a champion to force the political parties to enforce and respect the Constitution and our voting and free speech rights under the U.S. and Minnesota constitutions. I'm Steve Carlson, and I approve this message.